Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Today's featured guest does not think of herself as a storyteller. Rather, she sees herself as a poet. A native of New York City, our guest found her muse at age 6 and has been writing ever since. But as she told an audience at the Library of Congress, she is happy to own the title poet. Born and raised in New York City, Nikki began composing verse at the age of 6 and has been writing ever since that time. Accolades are plentiful for this featured author. Her website tells us that she was inducted into the Black Authors Hall of Fame in 2023. Prior to that time, she received the CSK Virginia Hamilton Lifetime Achievement Award, the Allen Award for significant contributions to YA young adult literature, the Children's Literature Legacy Medal, and the NCTE Award for Excellence in Poetry for Children. She's received the Coretta Scott King Award for Bronx Masquerade, a story of a teacher who stages an open mic poetry Friday in his classroom. He finds his students begin sharing their thoughts and feelings more freely than they had been before. Jasmine's Notebook, Talking About Bessie, Dark Suns, The Road to Paris, and Words with Wings have been named Coretta Scott King Author Honor Books. Talking About Bessie also received the Horn Book Fanfare. What is Goodbye and Words with Wings are ALA notable books. She has authored many picture books and novels, including the New York Times bestseller Barack Obama, Son of Promise, the Diamande Daniel chapter books, Child of Hope, Garvey's Choice, which, by the way, is my absolute favorite, One Last Word, Wisdom from the Harlem Renaissance, and A Walk in the Woods. Our featured author has read her poetry and given lectures at international schools in Russia, China, Sweden, and Tanzania. Moreover, she has participated in short-term mission projects in troubled areas such as Haiti. It is indeed an honor to welcome author and poet Nikki Grimes to take an author's journey with us today. Nikki, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your website mentions that you first discovered your passion for writing at age 6. Was this a result of an inspiring teacher, a book you had read, or maybe something totally different?
It was something totally different. Even before I was 6, I was fascinated with words, the idea that one word could mean many different things, and the notion that someone could write something funny and 1,000 miles away, someone could read it and laugh. That words on paper were that kind of powerful really stuck with me. But what drove me to write ultimately was that I was just so frustrated with feelings that I had nowhere to go to share them because I was in and out of foster care and I was surrounded always by strangers and I didn't feel I could trust anyone who was around me, and I needed to get these feelings out. I was frustrated and sometimes angry and confused about what was going on in my life, and I felt as if I were going to burst. And one day I just grabbed a pen and started writing what was on my mind and what was in my heart. And I discovered something magical. At the end of that writing, I noticed that I felt lighter, even though nothing had changed, but there was a lightness in me, and I felt that I could move forward because of that. And I knew, even though I couldn't articulate it, that that was something I wanted to do again and again and again. And so I kept writing.
Now, had you ever, as a child, thought of maybe doing something else, or did that writing just so captivate you, so define your personality that you just wanted to stay there?
Oh, I knew that there would be other things that I would do in addition to writing, but never in place of it. So the question was what other things I would do in addition to my writing. I love visual art, I love design. There's certain, other things I was interested in dance and in music, but I always came back to writing. That was sort of home for me.
We try to be specialists in this day and age, and we specialize so much that we forget there are things outside of those specialties that actually add depth and dimension when we start doing them. We bring those things back to what our real specialty is.
Absolutely. Well, even then, people tried to get me to focus just on one thing. And the advice my father gave me was very different. He said, no, explore everything you're interested in. And when you decide what discipline you want to focus on, you will be able to use everything you've learned. Nothing will be wasted. And he was absolutely right about that. So the theater that I explored is why my voice in literature is as strong as it is. And my sense of characterization comes from that. My explorations of music applies to the literary quality, the lyrical quality of my work. So, in fact, every single thing that I attempted has found its way into my work in one way or another. It was just the best advice ever.
Thank you for bringing up the point about the music of the words, because that's one of my pet peeves that we don't do enough of in language arts classes. We tend to look at tone and mood, and so many times it's by formula rather than by hearing the music that actually the author is creating, like a musician would create a piece.
Absolutely. I mean, I know work is where it needs to be when it sings. If it's singing on the page, then you've done something. That's where it should go.
I
That's
love
when
that. Okay, now, whatever you write, it seems to hold honor, integrity, have a good heart, and this need for self-discovery, as all of those together bring about a personal fulfillment. And have these qualities driven everything you've ever written, or have they at least flavored it?
for sure they're part of that. The thing when I try to identify the thread that ties all of my work together, it always goes back to the word hope. I feel if my work doesn't incorporate some element of hope, then I have missed the boat. That's the single most important thing for me, to have in all of my work, whether for children or adults, but most especially when writing for children. If it weren't for faith and hope, I wouldn't be here myself. And so I'm always looking to add that in, most especially because I often, not always, but I often deal with difficult subject matter. I'm dealing with um, topics that are challenging, or characters are experiencing things that are challenging, that are hard. And I want the reader to come away from the story with an element of hope about this situation and what the possibilities are, not only for the future of that character, but for their own future.
Now, according to the Poetry Foundation, you attended Rutgers University, earned a BA in English, a minor in African languages, and you had the absolute honor to study with Tony Cade Bambara, Nikki Giovanni, Miguel Algarin. These
Yes.
are authors with very strong social consciences. And I'm sure that they influenced you somewhat as a writer, but you also were probably one of those unique students who were coming in with this foundation already set. So, where else were they able to take you?
Oh my goodness. I learned a lot about the importance of community. We we work alone as writers. When we're putting those words on the page, nobody else is there. But for our lives to really be all they can be, it's important for us to have community, to be able to bounce ideas off of one another, to encourage one another, to spur one another on, and to challenge one another, to grow ourselves, to stretch ourselves, to challenge ourselves so that we grow as artists and become all that we can be. And I certainly learned that from being in the company of such artists.
Now, you traveled to Tanzania to study Swahili literature, and that must have had some type of influence on you as a writer. How did it affect you?
Well, it wasn't so much studying literature. I went there to collect folk tales. And well, it was a wonderful experience just being in that environment, of course. And also learning the ways in which these tales connected across the continent. Every time I try to nail down a story as being originally from the area I was in, I'd find that there was a similar story, you know, a country over, two countries over, and that several tribes would have the same story, just with slight differentiations, right? And so I learned the way, once again, the ways in which we are really all connected, and our stories link across time, across tribes, across continents. Um, we all live by story in one way or another, and we find that our stories are not that different from one another. I think that's fabulous.
It shows that interconnectedness that we all have, and that's a lesson that we all hope that we not only learn someday, but that we begin practicing it a lot more.
Exactly.
We don't do that enough in today's age, and that's a shame. You continue on with this multicultural perspective by studying for 3 years in Tanzania and then moving to Sweden and living there for 6 years. Now, while you were there, you became involved with a radio show for immigrants. And would you like to tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yes. Well, I was in Tanzania actually for 1 year. Then I went back to the States for 3 years and then moved on to Sweden and ended up being there for 6 years. Didn't really know how long I was going to be there. But I loved getting involved with the radio programming there. I did some television, I did some radio. The radio was really a lot of fun. I had an opportunity to do a program on African American expatriates living in Sweden. And I really gathered once for this interview, and because it was for an international audience, I assumed that it was going to be in English. And just before we got going, I looked to the engineer and I said, "This is going to be in English, right?" And from his crestfallen expression, I could tell that it was not. And so I said, "Excuse me for a moment." And I ran out of the studio, translated all of my questions to Swedish, came back in and did the interview. Fortunately, all of my guests also spoke Swedish, so we were able to conduct the program. And then when it was all over, one of them said, "And for our next trick, we'll do it in Chinese." And we had a good laugh.
Oh my gosh. Again, it's that adaptability and the commitment not to be angry, but to make a difference, to find a solution.
Exactly. Well, anger is not very useful, so.
I couldn't agree with you more, Nikki. Now, what was the most challenging book for you to write? Was there one?
Oh, hands down, it was Ordinary Hazards, my memoir. And in part because memory is just such a tricky thing. There is fact and then there's truth, and not always the same thing. Um, for one thing, sometimes we fuse memories. We'll have two memories and not realize that they're two separate things, and we'll fuse them as one. Sometimes we remember something as having occurred in one place when in fact it occurred somewhere else. There are all these tricks of memory. So what you have to look for ultimately is the truth of what you remember, how it impacted you, how you saw it, how it, yeah, what is true for you, and right from that place. Uh, the other aspect of it as being challenging is that I lost a lot of memories. This is something that happens, I think, with anyone who's had any sort of trauma. But I think even if you haven't had trauma, there are things you tend not to remember. There are some memories that are crystal clear, that seem almost present. They're so, you have so much clarity on them. And then there are other things that are just lost to time, and they can be good things. One of the surprises for me in working on Ordinary Hazards was recovering some good memories that had been, for whatever reason, lost. I remembered, um, I remembered writing about how my father's last gift to me were ice skates. And I remember these beautiful skates, and I suddenly wondered why he had bought me these skates. Now, obviously, skates are very expensive, but I didn't remember ever ice skating, so I couldn't figure out why this particular gift. And I mentioned it to one of my oldest friends, and she immediately launched into all these memories about us going ice skating together. And, she could name the rinks and, talked about drinking hot chocolate at the side of the rink and spinning me out in the center of the, because she had dreams of being an Olympic skater at one point. And so she would spin me around the ice and doing all these things. And within 24 to 48 hours of speaking with her, I started having flashbacks of the time that we spent on the ice. Now, that was a wonderful memory. There were really good memories, and I was surprised that I had lost them. But this connection with her brought them back. So that's how tricky memory is. And so that made it really challenging. I had to navigate the spaces where I couldn't remember details and join them with the ones that I could remember. And found ways to do that and creative ways to do that. And I had a wonderful editor on a project who helped me with that. But that made it an exceedingly challenging project, but also the single most important thing. I've always felt the most important thing that I can write ever is my own story. And now finally I've done that. And it only took me 39 years to finish.
That's a short amount of time.
Just a short amount of time. Yeah, nothing.
What I really like hearing is the fact that you talk about being with someone with whom you were close, and that person being able to transfer you back to those memories, to make a connection, a natural bridge. And sometimes, especially in this day and age with the pace that we live and the distances we are away from each other, that we lose connections.
Yes. Yes.
Losing those connections a lot of times results in the loss of some of those wonderful, precious memories that we could be holding on to.
It's true. And one of the reasons we have lost, excuse me, have lost those connections is because with social media, we have been convinced that connection is somehow communication, and it's not the same thing at all. And so we've sort of relied on this sort of superficial level of connection that doesn't go below the surface. And we have to go past that, make the phone call, have the visit, spend time with people so that real communication happens, real connection happens, and not just contacting, by a post or a like online.
Our lives have truly changed, but I'm hearing from you that our needs haven't, that they're still the same, that we still have these emotional needs and these needs for memories and these needs for families and close friends and to be aware of the people we are. Sometimes we forget that and we start to become different people.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. We are one another's mirrors.
Yes.
We see ourselves in other people and in the reflection of others' eyes and others' minds and thoughts and memories. So, yeah.
Now I want to ask you also, I asked you about the most challenging book. Is there one that was the easiest to write, like it almost wrote itself?
Ooh. Mm,
Or maybe even the most entertaining?
well, I can tell you that one of the most joyful books I ever wrote, I have this series of about very young. One is the first is called Bedtime for Sweet Creatures.
Uh-huh.
I had an idea to do a series of books about bedtime, playtime, bath time, and the first one was the bedtime, and everything about it was joyful. Writing it was joyful. The art in it was joyful, and I just came away from that project with such a great feeling. And and it's reflected in the book, but also in people's response to it. I hear from parents all the time who tell me that these are their children's favorite books, that they're read over and over and over again, and that makes me happy. Um, and I needed to just go to that place. It was just pure joy. We all need to spend time there.
We lose that perspective sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, as you and I both know, authors almost forever have been saying that if you'd like to be an effective writer, you have to be an avid reader first,
Correct.
because you need the patterns and you need the language and the sounds and the variations. I know your schedule is a bit crowded. You carry some heavy duty commitments.
Yes.
What type of reading do you find you can do given those limits?
Well, this will come as no surprise. I read a great deal of poetry. I love novels in verse. I read a lot of those. Um, I, I read a lot of memoir as well, because that's my favorite genre, actually, aside from poetry, is memoir. Sometimes it's in poetry and sometimes not. But those are the things I lean into and go back to again and again. The collections, of course, are great because you can pick them up, put them down, you know. You don't have to worry about all the connections between the poems. So that's a great thing to dip into from time to time. And yeah, but those are my favorite kinds of books.
Is there an author whom you admire the most?
No, there's not like one. I mean, there's certain ones I go back to. I love Mary Oliver.
Oh yeah.
Um, Lucille Clifton is close to my heart. Um, but oh my gosh, there's so many. I love Elizabeth Acevedo as a contemporary
Yes.
author. Um, my gosh, but as I said, there are so many who I adore. Yeah, but those are a few.
When you work with students, do you find that maybe all of this technology that they're using is affecting their imaginations in some way?
It is. I think they just need to be challenged more to stretch and to try things on their own. A lot of times children don't rise to the occasion because they're not being challenged.
Exactly.
They have to be challenged. Sometimes people assume that something's going to be too difficult to them for them, so they're not even asked to do it. But I always find whenever I challenge students, they do answer the call. They do rise up. They live up to the level of our expectations. If we have high expectations, they will reach those. They will come up to those. Um, so a lot of it has to do with the expectations that we set for them.
I love that answer. Years ago, I had a student in my seventh grade English class who had an IEP, and with an IEP, there are certain limitations and certain considerations you must give the student in order to be successful, as you know.
Right.
And we were doing a project, and I was told, do not ask the student to do this project. It would not fit her IEP. She can't do it. It's outside her realm.
Mm.
And I went to her and I said, how do you feel about this? She says, oh, I can do it. I said, no, are you sure? Yeah, I'm fine. She produced one of the best ones,
I'll bet she did.
but it was
Yeah.
not in the IEP.
Right. Right.
But it was in her heart. And, when the heart and the mind work together, as your writing says, that's synergy. That's when it happens.
Exactly. I don't do it often. Occasionally I do poetry workshops. And one of the forms I like to teach is Golden Shovel, which I'm endlessly fascinated with. And I know adult poets that shy away from this form. And they said, I can't do that. You can do that. But I've done workshops with children, elementary, middle school, high school, and they all dive in, rise to the occasion, and love it. And I've done a couple of collections of these, and I get these great letters from teachers talking about how they introduced this idea, and then their children have just, run off and created all kinds of golden shovel poems. And sometimes they post them online or they send them to me in the mail, and they're just wonderful. And, they just dove in. They're like, well, sure, I'll give it a shot, you know. So we just need to challenge them. They are willing and ready to meet the challenge if we just lay it out for them.
I love that, because sometimes with the challenge, you can work some play in there too. I'll have
Oh,
students write
absolutely.
their sentences and make them a little longer and a little longer and a little longer.
Hmm.
And I have kids who love to play Fortnite,
Mm.
and that's all they were writing about. So I said, okay, we've got to keep the Fortnite because that's your motivator, but we also
Hmm.
have to do some other things. So we declared Fortnite Friday. When we do our word of the day, it can be Fortnite Friday. The sentences that come out of there, the levels of structure, the
Mm.
variety, the power in those words. And it's like sitting back and saying, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah, I agree. Now, in your own writing, has a colleague ever given you that one piece of advice that you've sat back and said, oh, wow, that's really good. Thank you.
Mm. Well, the best advice I ever, well, yeah, no, I have to say this is the best advice I ever got. Um, and it might sound like it's separate pieces, but it's all of a piece. It was from my first mentor, James Baldwin, who talked to me about the importance of protecting the area of your giftedness. So there's a lot of places in your life, in your work, where you're going to need to compromise to earn a living, obviously, but not to make compromise in the area of your gift. Keep that pure and write work that is meaningful, that you are proud of, so that when you look in the mirror, you like the reflection coming back at you. And to focus on your tool, sharpening your tool, and your tool is your language. And do those things, you're going to be in a good place. And so I bring all that particular group of lessons to everything I write.
Now, because our podcast is called An Author's Journey, I need to ask you an author specific question for our general authors who, as I do, run into writer's block sometimes. Do you run into that often? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I don't run into it very often, but I discovered for myself there are certain authors whose voices are close enough to my own that I can just read a little bit of their work and it will jog me loose if I'm in a block. And for me, that's Lucille Clifton, that's J. California Cooper, who's a fabulous short story writer, and also Gary Soto. He's an amazing poet. These are writers after my own heart, and I can read just a little bit of any of their work, and it will jog loose whatever's going on in my head. Take me
I can
back.
see your I can see your Garvey character reading Gary Soto's Oranges poem.
Yes.
Because there is such a connection of feeling and of trying your best, and darn, I'm not the smartest and I'm not the slickest and I'm not the most acceptable in society, but my heart's good. My
Exactly.
heart's pure. I'm gonna make it somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, you share that. Both of you as authors share that, and that's great. Now, I know there are many of our listeners who would love to have their work recognized by a publisher, and many of them maybe right now are getting ready to send their work out. You have some advice that we had talked about earlier in the day, and I think this is advice that some of these authors need to hear because you made a lot of good sense. So, would you share that with them, please?
Sure. The first thing I would say is not to be in such a hurry to publish. To spend more time focusing on honing your craft, making sure it is the very best that it can be, because this is a very competitive industry. And so when you go out, you want to go out strong. You want to make sure your work is absolutely the best that you can make it in that particular moment. Um, Also remember to it's important to be in community, because you learn from each other. Iron sharpens iron. Put yourself in a group where you're going to learn how to both give and receive critique. That's going to strengthen your work. And then when you are ready to go out, when you think, okay, absolutely, I'm ready now to send my work out, stop first and do some research. Figure out what publishers you think might be interested in the kind of work that you want to write. Um, Look at their catalog, see what kinds of books they've already done that you resonate with, and start to make a list. And before you send anything, do the research to find out what their submission guidelines are. Not every publisher accepts work that is unagented. If you don't have an agent already and you're submitting work directly, you want to make sure you're sending it to somebody who actually is going to accept that. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time. Not good. So spend some time doing some of that research before you send any of your work in. And I suggest don't just choose a single publisher. Put together a list of maybe half a dozen that you want to try. Um, because the other thing that you can absolutely count on in this business that you won't like to hear is rejection. It's a huge part of what we do. And so you need to prepare for that. Um, be prepared that you may get a no to that first from that first publisher. So be ready to send the work back out. Already have a second one in mind, and a third one in mind, and a fourth one in mind. It doesn't matter ultimately how many no's you get because it only takes one yes. And so approach it in that way, knowing that it might be a long journey to get where you want to go, but it's worth it. You're going to learn things along the way, and it's going to benefit you. It's a good thing.
Now, I know there are a lot of our listeners who want to find out more information about you and maybe even invite you to their school or to their community to speak with their students or their fellow community members. How might our listeners get in touch with you?
Well, they can certainly connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, Nikki Grimes at Nikki Grimes 9. I'm on Instagram at Poetry Nikki. So easy to remember. So you can
Uh-huh.
definitely connect with me on social media and find me at my website, www.nikkigrimes.com. So, yeah.
I know there'll be a whole lot of folks wanting to reach out to you. Your work is not just well known, it's well inspired. And I think that's the reason it translates the way it does.
Thank you.
You have a talent that goes beyond the page. That talent goes to the heart.
Thank you.
Now, Nikki Grimes, it has been indeed an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. I feel energized and uplifted. Your writing continues to inspire your readership and me as well. That spans across many generations. I want to thank you for taking this author's journey with us today. And thank you for fashioning your works with such positive values and the worth of social awareness to improve not just ourselves, but our world as well. We appreciate your sharing with us your insights into the field of writing. God bless you. You are a gem.
Thank you so much. You were so kind. But sharing is what we're here for.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you again, Nikki. Well, that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For An Author's Journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.